Hello, this is Gabor Sabo from the Code Maven News podcast and screencast and video interviews. And with me is Sawyer, who is the current pumpkin of Perl 5. And we're going to talk about Perl and the language and the compiler and whatever. Hi, Sawyer.
Hey,
Please introduce yourself and tell me about a little background about yourself and how did you get to being a pumpkin? What is a pumpkin and whatever?
okay, okay, let's try. A little bit about myself first. I started with Pascal and assembly and C, also a bit of C++. And at some point, after a friend recommended and suggested, at high school I started playing with Perl. And I started learning the language, which was the basics were fun. I learned it in like one night at like 4 a.m. and it was a lot of fun. And then I started writing some code, doing different stuff. I think the first thing I wrote was actually a program that downloaded all of the comics of a certain comic strip that I like and just put them all in nice directories because the internet was not very fast and I wanted to download all of them and then read them at home. And I started attending the Tel Aviv Perlmongers groups, Tel Aviv PM, which you organized. And I gave a few talks there. And eventually someone, you, convinced me to go to FOSDEM and YAPC-EU, which is the FOSDEM is the open source conference in Belgium, and YAPC-EU is our European Perl conference. And you suggested I give a talk there. I remember we actually had a discussion about this where you just said, go ahead, and I said, no way, and you said, go ahead, and I said, no way. And we did that back and forth a few times until I said, fine, I'll go, whatever.
Okay.
And I went, it was a lot of fun. And I kept giving talks, and I started being more and more active in different projects. I became mainly active in the Dancer web framework, which I started using for a personal project, and slowly I had more and more interest in it and became the maintainer of it, and we grew a nice community around that. When I moved to the Netherlands, which is where I live right now, to work at Booking.com, I created another group. We already had Amsterdam X. I'm sorry, Amsterdam PM, which is a Dutch programmers group, and I founded the Amsterdam X programmers groups, which is not X for Sawyer X, but it's X for
Okay.
expat, and I really have to stress that. Amsterdam E is not as nice as Amsterdam X for expats, and the idea is that it is much more comfortable for people who don't speak Dutch, and the timing is different, so it's a bit different, and we found to be more successful for us because we had little participation from expats. We have a large group of people doing Perl in Amsterdam and the area, but they weren't going to Perlmongers meetings. So
Yeah.
I started that group. This year, Ricardo Cygnus, who was the Perl Pumpkin for the last few years, he stepped down from that role, and I took over it, mainly passed on from him, less of I fought him for it. And that basically takes most of my time nowadays. I still do a lot of conferences. This month and a half, I think I'll be at 3 conferences. And along with that, Dancer, which I'm still active in, and of course work, that's basically my time nowadays. The the Perl Pumpkin, I don't know if I have a good story for it. I was always interested in the internals of Perl. It's written in
What is a
C.
pearl pumpkin?
So yeah, the Perl Pumpkin is basically you could say it's the project manager for the Perl 5 language. I was always interested in the internals. I mean, I came from C, which is what Perl is written in. It's very sophisticated C, and I never really got to those levels, but I was always interested in that, and I always tried to keep track of what's going on in the language itself. The underpinnings of what we know is the Perl syntax and how that works and all the optimizations there, lexing, parsing, all that stuff. It's very fascinating. But the mailing list for that is just too much. It's I don't know if you've ever read the Perl 5 Porters mailing list. The group that maintains Perl is the Perl 5 Porters, and the P5P is either the name of the group or the list, of course. And the list is very hard to follow because it's basically an amalgamation of several different communication channels. So there's the tickets, and there's the discussion, and then there's the some summaries that are sent there for commits. At least they used to be. It could be a lot of different stuff, and they're all combined into one list, which is what P5P reads and writes to. And it was just too much to keep track. So I started summarizing them. So now I read them every day, and at the end of the week or at the beginning of the week, I publish a summary of it that you can read on the list or on a different list, the Perl 5 summary list just for summaries, or on Twitter, the Perl 5 summaries Twitter, and also on Blogs Perl. So I became active in the core group, mainly in following discussions, in giving notes here and there. I started getting more interested in the internals. I was always very active in the community perspective of Perl, and I was always wondering about the direction and the vision for Perl and where to move forward with it, specifically Perl 5. So when so when Ricardo decided to step down, he was looking at what kind of people could fill the void and could take on this role. And I was nominated by someone from the core group, the core developers, and it was discussed internally, and a decision was made that I would do it appropriately, which hopefully I would. So basically what it means.
Oh, now you're the pumpkin, and
yeah, I know. I'm still trying to do it right because I'm always worried that I'm not doing it properly. I mean, people think that
what are you doing? I mean, what was going on with Perl?
Well, no one really knows what the Perl Pumpkin does. So what it basically means is that I help with discussions, and I try to kind of navigate discussions towards actual actions rather than just bike shedding. Once in a while, there are conflicting ideas. Like one person who implements things says, I think it should be done this way. Another person says, I think it should be done this way. And then there's they reach a point where they just disagree and they cannot resolve it. And then I come in and I have to make a decision. Okay, we're taking this approach because A, B, and C. The thing is that I don't know all of the technical details that a lot of the bright people there do know. So I mostly listen a lot and then talk to people, oftentimes off the list, to get more information, and then I can make decisions. So a lot of my work is actually not done in tickets on the mailing list. You don't see me as much as other people. Mostly I talk to people outside the mailing list to get a better understanding of topics before I respond. So when I respond, it's usually at the end saying, yes, or I don't know, what about this direction? So that's kind of what the Perl Pumpkin does.
What does Perl do?
With this, well, Perl allows you to run Perl code, basically.
Okay.
It would be, I think that's probably the biggest value of it. It would be very hard to run Perl without it. But, I mean, there are a few other interpreters for Perl 5, and you could use them. They're either forks or they have limited capabilities in comparison. So the canonical implementation of Perl 5, which is has the largest group of developers that are committed to it, including grant money and sponsorships and stuff like that. That is Perl 5 Porters and Perl 5, what we call Perl. But jokes aside, Perl is a language that it can solve a lot of different problems because it has a multi-paradigm programming perspective. So you can write in procedural, you can write in object-oriented, you can write in purely functional. You can write in so many different ways. So you could apply it to so many different technologies. And because it has a good coupling with C using the XS layer and FFI if you want it, it allows you to interact with C and C++ code fairly easily and interact out with Perl. So you can speed up some parts in it, you can bind to libraries with it, etc., etc. So it's very high level. It is hyper dynamic, which is a term that I really enjoy using for that perspective, and it has a lot of really cool features under the hood. So I think that I use it to solve most of the problems that I have.
So what would you say to people who had experience, who knew about Perl maybe 10 or 15 or yeah, 15 years ago? Uh, what has changed since then? Has
Oh,
anything
wow.
changed?
There are so many things that have changed, both in fixes, in optimizations, in features. There are new syntaxes available. There are a lot of things that were introduced in order to solve specific problems. And I mean, it's very hard to summarize. I tried giving a talk about this and summarizing all the things that have changed since, let's say, 5.10 or 5.8. And it's just such a long list that it's very hard. I mean, let's take two versions back. And nowadays, Perl is not released every few years. It's actually released every single year. You have a new stable release. So let's take, you know what, let's take just two.
So what version are you at now?
We're now at version 5.24. Let's take a look at 5.22. It was released on June 1st, I think, and it included, just a few examples, the diamond operator that we know for input. We now have a double diamond operator, which is much safer. It's more secure. You have regular expression boundaries for Unicode. So like a lot of people play with Unicode and work with Unicode, but we have added several several boundaries for spaces, what Unicode considers a word boundary, what Unicode considers a sentence boundary, stuff like grapheme cluster boundaries, things that if you use Unicode, these are great. We've added them last year. The regular expression has a strict mode. Unicode 7 was introduced, added last year. This year, 5.24 already has Unicode 8, and we've already merged Unicode 9, so it will be released in the next version, which will be 5.26. So aliasing by references, for example, having const as a subroutine attribute, there are a lot of stuff like that. If you take a look at the recent version, for example, it was just released recently. It was released in, I think it was in May 9th. So there are a few other stuff. So the Unicode 8 I told you about, but now we have postfix dereferencing. One of the things that pisses people off is that you have to, when you have a very big structure and it represents an array, for example, could also represent a hash, you have to write the entire structure to reach all the way into the last element. And then you have to wrap it with a dereferencing in order to get what it references, which is kind of like using a pointer and dereferencing the pointer. And what happens is that you write all of this forward, and then you have to wrap the entire thing, because that's how the wrapping code works. But now we've added syntax to change that to the end. And these are things that seem simple, but it completely changes the way you write and the way you work, because you only move forward, which is some of the things that people like about functional programming, the way that you move. So these actually have a lot of value, and this is no longer experimental. You can now use this. Things like optimizing basic operations, additions, subtractions, multiplications, subroutine calls, stuff that people tend to use. All of these have been optimized significantly.
So you are talking about speed improvements.
Yes, these would be optimizations. Subroutine signatures that people really like and use in a lot of other languages, we now have. But now we're also optimizing it. So the next version will have substantial optimizations for subroutine signatures. What else? We're introducing the indented here doc syntax. A bunch of other languages have it. Now we will have that too. Additional changes have a lot of security related changes. For example, for Perl developers, familiar with the current directory being what you load when you try to load modules. It also tries the current directory. Okay. We're going to remove that. That is a security issue. And while a lot of people have used it, it's actually very problematic. We realize this is going to change in the next version. And
so that might actually break quite a lot of code out there.
Well, so one of the things that we actually did was release all of the core modules recently with that removed locally. And we've noticed very little breakage. The only breakage that happened was base PM, which is used by quite a few modules, and we're implementing it. We're probably going to merge a different implementation that implements the same thing but in a safer way for base PM. It has a specific usage that is trickier, but we couldn't observe, other than the base PM situation, we couldn't observe breakage that was major at all. So we're kind of safe with that. If your code assumes that you're loading from the current directory, you can just say, I'd like to load from the current directory. That will work just fine. Any code that does this will work just fine. But code that implicitly loaded from the current directory, that is going to be removed. And that is a much safer perspective of this. So if you take a few steps back and you look at all of this history, what we've added was a lot of syntax, a lot of changes in bug fixes, security, a lot of optimizations. We have pluggable keywords, so you can write an interpreter within the interpreter. There are really crazy stuff like that. And these are things that keep evolving and changing in the language. And you can't really see all of this unless you look at the global picture, like the whole picture of it.
Okay, so let's jump to something slightly different, to something that if someone wants to learn Perl or get involved in, learn Perl. Let's start with that. They have two groups here. One question is if someone wants to learn Perl, what would you suggest? And the other one, then, if someone wants to get involved in developing Perl, in helping further improving the language. So let's start with the.
So, right, if you don't know Perl and you hear all of this and you say, hey, this sounds like an interesting language, maybe I want to learn it. What I would recommend, there are two books that I would highly recommend. One is Beginning Perl by Ovid, Curtis Poe, who goes by Ovid, and the other one is Modern Perl by Chromatic. I think these are very, very good books that cover the essentials. Modern Perl tends to be more succinct, but it is very good, and Beginning Perl is very thorough, and I think Curtis has a very good way of explaining things. And they both teach you not Perl from like 10, 20 years ago, but Perl that you would write nowadays, that people would expect you to write, that is proper practices, that don't assume on, I know Unix, or don't assume on, I came from C, so it's exactly the same. Instead, they give you a very idiomatic and correct way of writing Perl that is extendable and secure and correct and fun. So I really recommend those if you want to learn the language. When it comes to learning how to improve the language itself, so the language breaks down to two parts. It breaks down to the core of the language and all of the modules for it. The modules for it are written in either C using a binding layer called XS, so it's kind of a glue language between C and Perl, or directly in Perl, which we call pure Perl, because it doesn't have any XS or C.
Yeah.
And you can write a module that is either in one of them or in both, whatever you want. So a lot of the language extensions are actually done using modules, and the language tries to have a small core that is easily extendable using modules. So a lot of the things that we assume on the core language, they're actually modules that you can just open pull requests for, you can contribute, you can work on these projects openly with anyone. It's a lot of fun, and there are a lot of projects. Example is one that I'm involved in, like Dancer, that you could contribute code to, and you could join those teams. Usually it's a team of people. Sometimes it's a single maintainer, sometimes one or two maintainers that work together, and you can always jump in and say, hey, I know a little bit of Perl, I want to help with this. There's also the pull request challenge, and the pull request challenge allows you to get tastes of it, kind of like a tasting menu, where every month you get a new module, and this module was curated to be both important and used and having issues to work on. So there's a filtering process going on there. It's not just random stuff, because CPAN contains whatever anyone wants to upload. CPAN is where we upload stuff, so it contains anything. And some of those no one really uses, some of those are not very good, but some of them are very important and used. And they get curated, and you get every month like, hey, here's a thing you could work on. And you can go and submit a pull request and talk to the author, and it's fantastic. Now, when it comes to the language itself, if you want to work on the language, that requires, I thought at first that it required learning C. Like if you want to work on the language, you need C. But the fact of the matter is that the language contains a lot of tooling around it that are part of the language that could use a lot of help. And many of these tools are actually written in Perl. I think the first contribution that I did was remove a core module and put it on CPAN. And one additional thing that we have now is that we have another module that we're thinking about making available separately from core as well, because that would allow people to use it without necessarily having to upgrade Perl. That is a contribution it can make without knowing any level of C. So I've been trying to collect these nowadays. I haven't gone very far, but I'm trying to collect all of these different things that you could do that don't necessarily require specific C knowledge. Now, if you do know C, you can always take a look at the existing tickets on rt.perl.org. And if there is any ticket there that you want to play with, the Perl source is open source, fully free software. Just clone it from Git. It's also available in a GitHub Mirror, unofficial GitHub Mirror, but it's available there. And you can just submit patches. You can email the mailing list, Perl5porters@perl.org, and you can contact us and say, hey, I'd like to work on something. What do I work on? Or I'd like to work on this ticket. What can I do? You can also comment on the tickets themselves. So that ticket, the whole combination of the mailing list, like if you comment on the ticket, we'll see it and we'll comment on the ticket back. If you write in the mailing list, everyone else will see it as well. So it all gets combined. So no matter how you access us, no matter how you contact us, we'll find it.
So it's either RT, the bug tracking system, or mailing list, or IRC,
Yep.
I get.
Sure, IRC, we're on irc.perl.org. Is it pound or hash P5P?
Okay.
And you can find us. Not everyone is always online, but drop a note. Someone will probably respond soon. And I think people who come in and just want to play with stuff are a really great resource, and they're a lot of fun. They add different perspectives. You know, they think from different angle, and it's always interesting to see what people play with.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I wonder if there is any other subject that we haven't talked about that you would like to mention here. Shout out to people.
I would shout out. I would shout out to everyone. It's tricky. So Tony Cook and Dave Mitchell have been working a lot on the Perl core as part of their grants, and they're doing amazing work, optimization, a ton of bug fixes, and stuff like that. We have one amazing contributor who works tirelessly on pretty much anything, and that's Father Chrysostomos, who I really like this person. He's a really nice guy. And Zephram, who tends to be an expert on incredibly detailed technical topics. I want to thank Jim Keenan, who's a fantastic curator of all of the tickets. If you open a ticket, he will see it. If you have a test there, he will run it. If you have a patch there, he will try to merge it and tell you if it's wrong. If it doesn't pass any kind of policy that we have, he will comment with explanations and links. It's just incredible. Todd Rinaldo and John Lightsey, who both worked on the changes to the current directory. So they work on the security team at cPanel, and cPanel have like an entire security team that does like crazy stuff. And they found a slew of these issues, and they raised them. They wrote the patches for them. Just fantastic work. Matthew Horsfall, who's putting the here doc syntax, the indented here doc. I mean, there's a list. I'm not gonna. I mean, I don't know. If you have another episode, I'll sit down and just go.
We can get back together a couple of months from now and see how things have progressed, and maybe the next time when the next version of Perl is released, then we can talk again, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be great. It's just too many for now, but yeah, I think very interesting things are happening. I'm very happy to see how the group is working together now, and I'd be interested in seeing where we're going to take this, because we're already introducing syntax, we're already introducing optimizations, we're already introducing lower memory consumption, we're already introduced like the Unicode support that Perl has, you know, thanks to Carl Williamson's efforts. Like, these are amazing things, and we already have all of that going on. So what are we going to do now is a very big and interesting question to me.
Okay, we'll talk about it later. Thank you for coming on the show, and
thank you for having me and letting me blurt out as many things as I can in the least amount of time.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Yeah, bye bye.